Okay, truth number 17. The spirit of the world wants to seduce you. In an earlier talk, I said something to the effect that Satan sees the significance of a person's heart, which is why he puts such a premium on influencing, clouding, seducing, and winning it. I want to explore this idea more fully in this segment, but first I must once again return to my own story. It was May of 1985, and my wife and I were about to make a decision that would prove to have a deep impact on the direction our lives would take in the future. It all started when I was reading a book by David Wilkerson, where he was talking about the bad effects television has on the lives of believers. The Lord used what I read in that little book to convict me about watching television. The whole idea seemed crazy to me at the time. Every Christian I knew watched television. I mean, it's not like I was watching raunchy or violent programming. It was mostly pretty tame stuff. But I couldn't shake the sense that the Lord wanted us to get rid of our television set. So that's what we did. Like any addiction, at first it was difficult. We didn't know what to do with our evenings. But we found different ways to occupy ourselves, and before long we got used to life without television. Eventually, months after the addiction to it was broken, the Lord allowed us to get another TV set. But with this major difference, we had to limit our viewing to watching videos. Rather than being hooked up to network television, we'd occasionally watch a documentary or a Christian movie or something. The advantage to being confined to videos was that we weren't tempted to channel surf, and we didn't have to deal with carnal commercials. It was 1 year later that the Lord led me to begin Pure Life Ministries. At the time, I couldn't see any correlation between watching network television and beginning this ministry to sex addicts, but over time it all began to make sense. There were occasions when I would come across a TV set plan, like at a friend's house or in a restaurant. It was amazing to me how differently I saw that programming now. Let me illustrate it like this. Consider a guy who quit smoking. When he was a regular smoker, he could go into a smoke-filled room without a second thought. But after he quit, he couldn't stand being in places like that. Why the change? Because once his lungs were cleaned out, he could now feel the poisonous effects cigarette smoke has on the lungs, something he didn't even notice when his lungs were used to it. That's a picture of how my eyes were open to the polluting effects carnal television had been having on my soul. So what at first seemed like an unwelcome restriction on my life became a true blessing to me. Now that the worldly fog had lifted off my mind, the Lord was also able to begin communicating to me in a much clearer way. He started revealing marvelous truths about Himself in Scripture. One of the most powerful things I experienced at that time actually occurred as I started studying the book of Revelation. No Bible study I have ever undertaken could compare to what I came into when I started studying that apocalyptic book. By the time I finished, I had spent over 1,200 hours in it. I listened to sermons on tape, read books, and studied commentaries. I prayed over the verses one by one. I studied the book of Revelation inductively and listened to a dramatization of the book on cassette so many times I wore out the tape. I even visited the ruins of the 7 churches in Turkey, which Jesus addressed in chapters 2 and 3. I was so taken up with this tremendous book that there were times that the realities of the spiritual realm, where the mighty conflict exists between the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness, actually became more real to me than the physical world around me. The message I uncovered in that Bible study affected me very deeply, altering the entire course of my life and ministry. This study opened my eyes to how the spirit of the world was affecting Christians, how it affected my life. There are actually 3 words in the New Testament that describe our planet. First, there's the word gay, which is simply the Greek term for the physical earth. Second, there's the word eon, which is sometimes translated as age and sometimes translated as world. It describes the temporal existence humans experience on earth during their lifetimes. God resides outside the limitations of time, but all other spiritual and physical beings are confined to the realm of time. And the spirit of the world is always doing its utmost to keep people's attention fixed on their present existence and off the hereafter. The third Greek term that describes the world is cosmos. This is a fascinating word to study because it describes the spirit that unredeemed mankind lives in. Maybe you could say it is the group think of the mass of humanity who live without God. The Apostle Peter calls on believers to escape the corruption that is in the world by lust. And it is that carnal passion that the enemy uses to influence and control our lives. The Apostle John really laid it out in his first epistle. He said, "Do not love the world nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. The world is passing away and also its lusts, but the one who does the will of God lives forever." Not only is that a clear-cut commandment not to give ourselves to the things of the world, but it also lays out how the spirit of the world appeals to our lower nature. It entices our flesh in the hopes of making us lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. It dangles the temporal possessions of the world before our eyes, encouraging us to lust after them, to demand that we have them. And it fosters within us the ambition for prominence, attempting to gain our worth from some worldly position rather than in our relationship with Christ. It's all part of being one with the spirit of this world. And it is in that lust-filled environment that the craving for illicit sex can thrive. I mean, when a person's life is filled with the things of this world, it really isn't a big step into pornography. And a person who's living with the lust for pleasure and possessions is not going to have the spiritual wherewithal to overcome the lust for sex. So how is a committed Christian supposed to live a consecrated life in a culture driven by television, internet, and social media? There needs to be some level of separation, doesn't there? I mean, if the only difference in our lives from the rest of those masses of unbelieving people is that we go to church on Sunday, can we honestly consider ourselves to be God's people? All I can tell you is that having spent much time in prayer over this issue has translated into controlling my television viewing, spending very little time browsing the internet, and no time on social media. I do not want to be a part of Satan's kingdom. How do we know where we should draw those lines? Well, we must sincerely ask the Lord to show us. If you belong to Him, you'll be able to sense His displeasure if you cross those lines. And if you belong to Him, you will not want any part of Satan's kingdom.